Traders, how are you? With Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. We have internet outages, McDonald's even reporting outages, record highs in stocks, and we have very bad news on the inflation front. Let's go ahead and get started. Stocks across the board in the United States were negative. Canada, however, was a positive 0.40%. One of the biggest pieces of news in this week's economic news is the inflation was higher than expected. So now we have a situation where the central bank of the United States, which essentially controls all of our lives with the growth of the economy and everything, may not be able, and they said that they're probably not going to start lowering rates until the second part of the year, probably June-ish or so. They didn't say June-ish, I'm saying June-ish. So it's a very bad situation for us due to the fact that if you don't know how the central bank affects our lives, since 2008 and 2009, the financial crisis that we had, essentially all of the world governments, especially the biggest ones like, Europe, Germany, the United States, China, Australia, all the big countries around the world basically lowered interest rates to the lowest in recorded history, not, the history of the United States, but the recorded history. And so that created a huge boom because if you just think about it analytically, if your interest rate on the credit card goes down or your car loan goes down or the interest rate is lower on your mortgage, for example, it's much easier for you to afford because you're not paying as much interest. So with the interest rates being so high, what happens is things are a lot less affordable. Add on the situation with the inflation, which is part of the reason why the interest rates are high. And you have a bit of a double whammy because now you can't afford anything because of the inflation because prices are going up so high. And then you also have a situation where it's harder to afford things because interest rates are a lot higher. So by the interest rates being higher for longer puts a detriment on the economy because the economy can't move, especially due to the fact that in a country like the United States, almost 70% of the economy is consumer spending. So you going out and buying stuff. So if you can't afford stuff because the interest rates are so high and the prices keep going up because of inflation, that means that almost 70% of the economy in the United States is starting to put the brakes. And a country like Germany, for example, which is now the third largest economy in the world, they have about almost 50% consumer spending. So I mentioned the stocks in the U.S. across the board were negative. The S&P 500, which is the 500 largest public companies in the United States, hit its 17th record close for the year. In the conspiracy weather section that I find every once in a while, here comes Conspiracy Marcello. Another country is announcing that its citizens are going to be required to accept biometric digital IDs. In this case, it's Nepal. But we also have other countries like Australia, the communist, someone said Ausjail, I think it was, they called it. Australia, I think it was Australia. Because, they went a little communist after the pandemic. China, obviously, Ghana, and the EU are some of the other countries that have announced it. Conditions affecting the nervous system have surged past heart disease to become the leading cause of all deaths worldwide. So this is dementia, migraines, strokes. That's actually something that I thought was really interesting. Take that information what you will. And New York's green rule could be shutting down upwards of 100 pizza joints in the city. The absolute radical green people on the left are saying that they have to install 75% decrease, a filtration system that cuts 75% of the smoke. There's a March 20th protest announced, and the filtration systems are going to cost about $20,000. So imagine a mom and pop shop, which are the best New York pizza joints. They have to spend $20,000 to install these filtration systems because, nobody's actually done a report, for example, if the pollution in New York has actually increased because of these ovens. Just saying that. Major measles outbreak reported at a U.S. migrant shelter. They're becoming infectious disease breeding grounds. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is that there was a senator from Venezuela that reported that they should be careful with the migrants coming in from the southern U.S. border, because now there's a lot of criminals from the Venezuela that are actually crossing into the United States. There was a report that the murder rate in Venezuela actually went down for the first time in, decades, because they're releasing all of their jailed criminals to allow them to come to the United States. So now we're going to have to deal with it. Awesome. U.S. patient died from the bubonic plague in New Mexico. Concerns rise over, quote, ongoing risk of the rodent-borne disease. If you guys don't know, this was considered to be the Black Death, if I'm not mistaken, during the 14th century in Europe. It killed about 50% of the population. Luckily now we do have treatment for it, but we do have our health system that's being absolutely overwhelmed with the situation with the migrants as well. So there might be an escalation into this situation, because now we even have Haiti, for example, which has they've gone into a full-blown crisis, basically. President left to go to Kenya to see if they can get some help with the military to bring order to the country. And then gang leaders essentially organized, and they basically started running the country. And there's videos going around of cannibals, gang members eating other people in Haiti. And now the Biden administration is saying that Florida is most likely going to see a wave of these migrants coming to Florida, which he's saying that he wants to allow them to come. And Governor DeSantis, which is anti-immigration, is setting up a not a naval blockade, but he's setting up the coastal, I forgot what it's called, the guards of the state. I forgot the name. It just slipped my mind since I do the videos in Spanish first. I always think in Spanish when I do these videos. But the reserve activated them. They already found one boat, for example, that did not seem to be migrants coming over to the U.S., but more an organized kind of situation. He said that they had guns and drugs inside a very nice-looking boat. I'm summarizing. You guys can look up the news in the jail. You can look up what actually was said in the news, what he said specifically. But I just found that to be very interesting, because it kind of seems like this is an organized invasion of the United States. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, I'll leave that to you to decide, but not going to be bueno very soon. Overseas market news. European stock markets hit a new record high on Wednesday. Europe was mostly higher, with Istanbul being the biggest negative there and Spain being the biggest positive. Latin American markets were mixed. The Merval in Argentina, I lived there in 2008, 2009. They seem to have a financial crisis every 10 years or so. Now with the first libertarian in the world at the helm, remember that Argentina, if you didn't know, Argentina was actually the richest, not one of the richest, but actually the richest country in the world in 1900. They started voting for Peronists, which is basically a socialist and communist ideals. The left, they've been running the country for the most part for the last 70 years, and now they have an almost 50% poverty rate. So now Milei comes along. They've had triple-digit inflation. So imagine we have supposedly 3-4% inflation in the United States a year. Now they have 25% in a month. So imagine you going to the store. I don't know what eggs cost in the United States, but basically a dozen eggs, let's say it's $4. And then you go the next month and it's $5. And it keeps going up like that. That's coming soon to the United States, but it's something that's amazing, because now Argentina is suffering one of the worst crises in decades. But Milei is starting to remove regulations, remove the red tape, and also lower a lot of the expenses of the government. And the inflation now is down to 13% a month in February from 25% in December. They also had their first surplus in 12 years at $589 million. So hopefully they'll continue to go on the up and up, because Argentina is an amazing country. I definitely recommend you guys visit. Africa and the Middle East, mostly mixed. Nigeria was the biggest winner there. And then in the far, far east, Asia, Australia, we had the Nikkei in Japan, 2.53% negative, but most of the markets there were mixed as well. A lot of news in crypto. Due to the record high in crypto that actually hit another record high on Thursday, which was 73,798. Bitcoin is starting to eclipse a lot of other markets as well. JP Morgan Chase, which is the largest bank in the United States by market cap, I believe by revenue and also number of clients, they said that now people are starting to invest more in Bitcoin than in gold, according to their clients. Bitcoin surpassed silver to become the 8th largest asset in the world. And in addition to that, it surpassed the Swiss franc to become the 13th largest currency in the world. If you call Bitcoin a currency, because we have some people saying, that it can be a currency because of the volatility. Commodities, crude went on a tear this week, up 3.88% in the U.S. to 81.04, while international crude, which is called Brent, went up almost 4% to 85.34. This has to do with the escalation with the war in Ukraine, in addition to the situation with the Houthis attacking the ships. Remember that they actually were cutting the internet cables on the seafloor in the Red Sea. The Red Sea being where the shortcut, kind of where you don't have to go all around Africa to go from Asia to Europe, but you go through the Suez Canal, which is on the border of Egypt and Israel and Gaza. Iron ore prices fell by over 7% this week after disappointing demand from China. Iron ore tumbled 25% at its peak in January. So the second largest economy in the world, which is China, which essentially makes everything for the entire world, right? Their demand for iron ore or construction material is starting to go down quite a bit. That would imply that the demand for raw materials are going down, which means that the overall economy isn't doing well. When you add in the situation that now inflation is actually continuing to increase, and we're not going to be able to lower the rates as fast as we wanted to, there may be a bit more headaches when the economy coming very soon. The two most important commodities are starting to diverge quickly. Copper is rallying to 9,000 a ton. Copper being one of the most important materials in the world. Surged 5% last week and ended the month on a long bull market. Bull market meaning that it's going up quite a bit. The cacao, chocolate, if you guys didn't know, comes from a tree, which is called cacao. It's kind of like think of it like an apple tree. It looks a little different, obviously, but they get the cacao and then they mix it with other things to make our chocolate. That hit another record high. If you guys have been following, there's been drought in the 3 countries in Africa that the majority the production comes from the world. In addition to that, they're having a problem with a lot of the plagas, the bugs that come in and eat the fruit. So it's up more than 16% in a week, 10th weekly gain in 11 weeks. So if you like chocolate, you should probably stock up on it because it's probably going to start to get very expensive. Not very expensive, but it's going to go up quite a bit. Eggs are soaring once again. Grade A egg prices per dozen jumped 40% to $2.13. To $3, so went from $2.13 to $3 from November to February, and gold went down 1.06% from a record high a few weeks ago. It closed $2,156.70, while silver was on a tear, went up 3.77% to $25.28. Financial and banking news: China posted their first monthly inflation on Monday after 4 months of deflation. Their CPI, the Consumer Price Index, went up by 0.7%. Most people, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. Most people don't realize that in the United States, we're on our 3rd central bank. The first one failed, the second one failed, and now we're on the 3rd one, which is most likely going to fail very soon as well. So we're in a situation now, and most people don't understand that the central bank isn't a public institution. The state, the government doesn't own it. It's a private bank. And essentially every dollar that it admits, it's literally a debt that we have to pay for. I'm kind of doing a very overall, very high level resume of that. But the point is, we have people that are essentially controlling our lives through the central bank because of the interest rates. When we didn't have the central bank, it was on the gold standard. And essentially, since you can only mine a certain amount of gold per year, that means that the inflation was pretty steady. And we didn't have these bureaucrats that want you to start eating bugs and stop flying while they fly on private jets because it's bad for the environment. Just had to throw that in there. So we theoretically don't need a central bank because we haven't had one before. And it was one of the most prosperous times for the country, which was between the 2nd central bank and the 3rd central bank. But I just want to let you know that because it's going to open up your mind, go down the rabbit holes on YouTube and Google and everywhere else. Because we essentially don't need one, but that's part of the way that they control us. Conspiracy Marcello. More in financial and banking news. The Bank of Japan is starting to move toward ending the negative interest rate policy by April. One of the things, for example, that these bureaucrats do in the in the case of Japan is that they put the interest rates at negative. And imagine, for example, you have money in the bank and they're charging you to keep the money in the bank. So if you have a negative 1% interest rate, for example, and you have $100,000 in the bank, they're essentially going to charge you $1,000 a year, which is 1% of the $100,000 you have in the bank to keep your money in the bank because the central bank has negative interest rates. And in regards to deflation, if you don't know what that is, deflation is the actual decrease of prices, the opposite of inflation. It's part of the reason why we have a central bank, because as prices continue to increase, the government can continue to make more money. Because if you're making more money, if you're charged taxes by a percentage, the more money you make, the bigger percentage the government makes as well. You see how that works? Labor Department on Tuesday said that the inflation rose again in February. It was 3.2% instead of 3.1%. Another situation that we're having a really big problem with in the United States is the federal debt. In February, 63% of all the money that was received by the government went to just paying interest on the debt. So every dollar that they received, 63 cents of those dollars went to pay interest on the debt that we've already taken out. Not to build roads or support the military or build schools or education or Social Security. No. Just to pay the interest on the debt. And under this administration, the debt has continued to skyrocket, which means that eventually we're going to get to the point where we're just going to have to borrow money to pay the interest on the debt, not even pay the debt down. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is called monetization of the debt, where we literally have to create money out of thin air to pay our own debt. Now, a lot of other countries are starting to not want to use the US dollar because they're doing bilateral direct agreements where they pay each other directly in their own currency. Then people aren't going to have the same demand for the dollar, which means that the dollars that are outside of the US, which there are a lot more dollars outside of the US than inside of the US, are going to come back to the US. And that's when we're going to start to have a lot more inflation, because simple supply and demand. Once you have a lot of supply or something, right? When you, let's say, Volkswagen or a Hyundai, right? Prices aren't that expensive. But if you have something that there isn't so much of or has low supply, like a Rolls Royce, for example, the price is a lot higher. So when we relate that to a currency, the value of a currency going down is inflation, meaning that the prices of things are going to continue to go up. Not going to happen yet, but we're going to definitely start creeping in that direction very, very, very fast. U.S. Labor Department is also saying that the wholesale inflation went up 0.6%. The PPI, or the Producer Price Index, is the cost that it takes to produce a good or a service. So now we have the consumer who's buying these products and services at the end seeing an increase. We're starting to see a bigger increase in the producer, where the stuff is produced. So you can see that the trend is not in a good direction. And again, we go back to those interest rates where if they're higher for longer, it's worse for you and I because it's not going to get the economy moving. JP Morgan Chase was also fined $350 million by the Federal Reserve, tied to a program to analyze firm and client trading for misconduct. In political news, the center-right Democratic Alliance won Sunday's general election. In economic news, the unemployment rate in India went up to 8% from 6.8% in January, according to the government department that reports out in India. They did have an expansion, and it looks like India now is the fastest growing economy in the world that actually overtook China. China's starting to have a lot more problems, and I personally don't think China's going to overtake the United States because they have their own problems, especially the situation with the population. They're literally going to have a collapse of the population soon. Retail sales in the United States was less than expected in February. They rose only 0.6%, and the numbers for January and December were downgraded, meaning tie that back to the consumer spending, which is 70% of the economy. If the consumers aren't spending money, that means the economy isn't moving, which means the world economy isn't doing well. In corporate news, Airbnb is banning indoor cameras globally. McDonald's was hit by a multinational tech outage, but they're saying that it was not related to a cyber attack. And Xiaomi, which is the cell phone company in China, they went up over 8% after they're saying that their new electric vehicles are going to be delivered on March 28th. Dollar Tree fell over 14% after they said that they are starting to change their expectations for the revenue, and the revenue also fell short of the forecast. So, let's open our minds a little bit. Dollar store, people generally have less funds, or lower income people go to dollar stores to shop. So if they didn't reach their goals for revenue, that means that the people are starting to shop less or spend less money in these stores. Remember that I also reported about 3 to 5 weeks ago that we had higher end stores like Coach change their expectations as well in regards to revenue. So we're getting hit both on the low end of the consumer and the high end, which means that the economy probably isn't heading in a good direction overall. Tesla shares are down 32% in the past 3 months, especially after Wells Fargo downgraded their stock expectation from underweight to equal. They're saying that the risk in the volume and the price cuts is going to have a diminished impact now. And Fisker, which is another electric vehicle maker in the United States, collapsed almost 52% after they're saying that they are riling around advisors to put in a bankruptcy filing. They're hoping to get sold to one of the bigger automakers to survive. Technology, a male humanoid robot that was unveiled in Saudi Arabia touched inappropriately a female reporter. Men will be men, even if they're robots, it seems like. And South Africa, Nigeria, and other countries in Africa reported internet outages, even though it was fixed very quickly. And Castellon, which is a startup in the United States developing hypersonic weapons, they're going to start testing these weapons for the Pentagon. And if you didn't know, Russia already has these hypersonic weapons, whereas the U.S. is actually still developing them. Just throwing that out there. International events. I mentioned to you guys the situation with Haiti. El Salvador, the Bitcoin capital of the world, is dropping the income tax from 30% to 0% on international investments and money transfers. And that's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.